let's wait another minute or so and we'll get going here. Mark, you got a killer hat on it. I love that hat. I need to get one of those. The pirate hat.
John, you made it back.
I made it back. I survived.
He lives.
I live. Hey, Mike. Yeah, it was wow, what a ride. As Ty knows, because Ty was one of my mentors through this whole process. I like 3 weeks ago, I had ridden 50 miles on a motorcycle ever in my life. And then I went and went to a shop here who does adventure bikes and convinced him to kind of let me do, 3 hours worth of like training in the parking lot. And then we went on a Husqvarna 500. We went for like a 75-mile ride. So 125 miles total in 60 years. Then I flew to Portland, or flew to Bend, Oregon, and picked up a GS F700 BMW, and rode it 1,450 miles in 6 days. So
wow,
it was
amazing.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Crazy. Yeah, thanks, man. It was such a good ride.
Awesome, great trip.
Yeah.
How many people were with you, John?
That sounds like the perfect midlife crisis adventure.
Yeah, exactly.
It's either that or like a red sports car.
Yeah.
Totally. There's a whole stereotype that we can fulfill.
I know for sure. I got, being 60 now, I got to tick a few of those kind of things off. Yeah. So I was with my buddy Tinker Hatfield, and we kind of rode the first few days together, and he went from McCall up to Sandpoint, and then I drove from McCall to Sun Valley, and then down from Sun Valley to Park City, and I met my boys who took our sportsmobile across, and we just did a road trip across northern Colorado, and wow, it was super cool. So
wow,
I love how John just drops Tinker Hatfield, the first episode on Design Masters on Netflix. It's just my buddy. We just wrote down a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, he's a good man. He married us, as you and Ty know. Yep. Yeah. So it was really fun. All right. Well, let's get going. So thanks, Steve. Thanks for last week leading the charge. Really appreciate it. I heard it was a great conversation, and it was really good. So I caught up on a little bit of it with the crew. So and I'm so psyched, Balaji. We got the case study done. Unbelievable. Yeah. So Balaji and Deloitte Pixel are a topic of a new case study, an HBS case study that I think, how long have we been working on it, Balaji?
My daughter was about a year, about just being born. Yeah. It's about 2.5 years. 2.5 years.
Yeah. Crazy. So it's called Deloitte Pixel A, Consulting with Open Talent. I think it's going to be really good for all of us because it's a really great adoption story, and it's really awesome. So yeah, that's going to be out. I think Mike Tushman's going to start teaching it. Did he say he's going to teach it this summer, Balaji? Is that right?
He did say that, yes. He is.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we're going to do it. So this is the A case study, and then we're going to start working on the B case study whenever Balaji's ready to let us do that. So it's up, Balaji, up to you on that. But psyched, I think there's a lot of good stories in there and a lot of good things for everybody to think about. And as soon as it becomes available publicly, I'll let everybody know. So hey, I thought I'd just do a breakout again today. And but last week we did a 3-person breakout instead of a 2. What do you guys think? Should we do 3 today or 2? 2, 3. Okay, people are signaling me 3. So Brandon, let's break out to 3. And let's give it a little bit. We'll give it a few more minutes too, just so we can really check in with people.
Yeah, we did it for about 6.5 minutes last time. So
is that good for everybody? Yeah. Okay, let's try that. Awesome.
All right, here we go.
Cool. Morning.
Greetings. Hey, we're all still in the same room.
Yeah, here we go. Make out top.
I'm back. I can't speak for.
Hey, how are you, man?
Good, John. Glad you had a good trip, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, well, Mike Morris was the one who inspired me for this trip. One of the inspirations for sure. He did a little trip beforehand. It was awesome. So
yeah,
it was. One of the things as everybody comes back in the room, one of the things that was super interesting culturally is you go through Oregon, and Oregon, you know, they were pretty respectful of the whole, you know, shelter in place and all those kind of things. And you cross the border at Boise, Idaho, and it was like party central. I mean, there were hundreds of people, you know, aggregating. It was kind of crazy. Yeah. And then it kind of, you know, even it got a little bit more, you know, like shelter in place in Utah as well. So it was interesting. So, well, thanks for everybody being on the call today. And, you know, if I'm a little slow today, apologies. Just like my ears are still ringing a little bit from being on the road. So one of the things I've been thinking about, and I don't think, Chris, did Chris join us? Chris had another meeting, so he wasn't going to be able to join.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. But I thought one of the things that I've loved about the conversations in the last few weeks is that we've had so many good ideas and we've had so much really amazing conversation. And I just feel like, you know, I mean, I think I'm kind of harking back when I was on the bike, I was thinking about that figure of, you know, now over 40 million people unemployed. And I think we talked about a couple weeks ago, the idea that maybe 40% of those folks may not be employed again, right? So there's 16, 17, 18 million folks that may be out of a job permanently. And I feel like, you know, we as an industry have a unique opportunity to help solve a big global, really, really bad problem, really awful problem, that if we can come together and do it in a way that, you know, is collaborative and come out with one voice, that we think about, you know, how do we do education, all those things. So I kind of threw out this idea of, you know, based on a lot of dialogue from our last several conversations, we need to focus. And I think that's the thing I really thought about a lot on the bike. You know, it's like the world needs more action, right? Like a lot of people have been talking for a long time about a lot of issues, but we've got to take some action. I really, really want to make this group one that, you know, we can take action and do good things in the world. So the four key areas that I heard, you know, in the last couple of weeks are standard, you know, how do we create standards, certification, accreditation, education, and research. And, you know, in research, I'm thinking about market research and marketing and all those kind of things. So what would the future look like in each of these areas? And if we were to achieve kind of our goal of higher adoption of this stuff? And I keep thinking about, I don't know who said it, maybe Steve, it was you or Balaji on another call, but that idea that, you know, historically, employment is such a binary thing, right? Either you're an employee or you're not, or you're a vendor and you have to have insurance and all these kind of things. So how do we create more flexibility in the employment market? So more people have the opportunity to work, more people have the opportunity to upskill, more people have the opportunity to be involved, but in a way that they can do it with the life that they want to lead as well. So more opportunities for more people to solve some of these problems. So that's kind of the thinking I've been doing, but I'd love to kind of dive in and you know, get everybody's point of view on how should we go about this? Like how should we take action? What does that mean? And how do people want to do it as a part of this collective? I mean, I think we're stronger together than we are alone. So that's kind of, for me, one of the starters, but maybe I'll just launch in here. I'm just going to call on people randomly as I see them on the screen. But Kirsten, you always have such a great point of view and of culture and things that are happening in culture. Do you want to, have you thought about that context of, you know, in your day-to-day work of like moving from, you know, talking and thinking to doing, you know, how do we take action? And then how would that apply to this group? How do we solve these problems?
Such a big question. Okay, so yes, I've been thinking a ton about it, and it's interesting because, you know, I think I'm just going to speak anecdotally for myself, and then connect it back to where maybe there's potential in terms of this community. But I would say personally, on a personal level, and I was just sharing this a little bit with the group that I was in, and maybe with yourself as well. So I came from a background in terms of working in the brand world and in the advertising world. And I left that world to go more into innovation consulting, because I was like, let's just stop talking. Stop talking. Let's start doing things. Let's start thinking about, you know, brand action and brand behaviors and creating impact. And so I believe in my personal journey, what I've been so focused on is trying to bring the magic of brand and creativity with, you know, action and business and outcome, because I believe in obviously those two worlds just colliding. And it's really interesting because I think, there's not, as like as obvious as it seems, there's still not a lot of forms to make that happen. Everyone's kind of still put in boxes. And so one of the reasons why I personally am so interested and excited to participate in this community is that this is a world where there's people with so many different backgrounds and outcomes, and it's the people who understand, the brands and the behavior, but then also the technology and the platforms to make things possible. So that was a little bit of a rant to just say, yes, I've been thinking about it. We have an upcoming series that we're trying to host on brand action. So connecting with companies that are just actually shifting marketing dollars towards doing more. And how is that showing up in companies and in the world and the products and the services and the experiences that they're creating? So I spend probably too much time thinking about it. And I don't know, I think that's a really big question around how do we make it possible, and how is there a way to create, I think there was some conversation, I've unfortunately missed a couple of the conversations recently, but what is that platform of platforms? How do we start to understand what our strengths are so that we're able to work more together? And to me, so often it starts with, is there something that people on this call are interested in solving? Because to me, it almost starts with understanding, is there something that we want to create impact with? And really kind of who is interested in that, and then how do we organize? Because for me, so much of it isn't just kind of alignment, but understanding where we want to go. So even, I don't know, maybe it could be interesting to identify, like, these are topics or certain areas that people are really passionate about creating impact in. And could we potentially organize? Is there an opportunity to organize around those to see if there's something that we could really do?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that's, one of the calls recently people were talking about and starting to self-organize, and Sheila did a great job of kind of leading that on some of the ideas around standardization and certification. So, it felt like 2 calls ago, people were starting to self-organize, and I was really, really captured by the passion around that and the excitement. It feels like, to me, because I come in the same world as you do, Kirsten, went from advertising, got fed up, got into innovation. And one of my guiding principles is, really work hard to identify what wants to happen in culture. Yeah. And if it's something that's aligned with you, then just help it happen, right? Let's just help it happen. And I think, with the way the world is right now, it needs help. And so how do we as a group kind of organize ourselves so we can really make that happen? Hey, yeah. Pranesh, what about you? You always have some great thoughts, and you've got such a great perspective from where you sit. Any thoughts to add to the conversation on how we get organized, how do we take action, and what should we be focused on?
Yeah, I've only joined the group recently, so I still feel like I'm learning a lot. I think, a couple things strike me when I think about the conversation. I think the certification angle that's been touched on is super interesting. How do you create some standardization of the understanding of talent and where it is and what people's capabilities are? It's a really difficult problem, though, and so trying to standardize and create certifications around information work or work beyond kind of basic skilling, I think there's some really interesting challenges there where this group is kind of capable of helping create some structure and at least starting people on that journey, because I'm not sure where else something like that comes from. I had an interesting discussion with Simon on the fact that I think he was saying that with crowdsourcing, something like only 40% of the problems, or maybe it's 60%, but 40% of the problems are solved by people who on paper don't seem to have the right skills to solve that problem, right? If you look at a traditional resume or CV. So I think that's a really interesting challenge. I think the other thing when it comes to culture that I'm wrestling with and would love to hear other people's thoughts on, how do we get people, over the fear of this way of working? And I say that as someone who's working in a very traditional job and company. But I do think there's something there, because when I first looked at this space, my thinking was that a lot of that fear stemmed from, the US doesn't have much of a safety net and support system. And so you think about, do you need protections like healthcare and things like that are more universal? And obviously there's a push from some of that freelance economy to get those protections. But even if you look globally, I don't think the movement has the level of traction it could have, even in countries where there is that, protection and flexibility. And so there's something that's beyond that, I haven't identified what it is, but would love to hear, what that is. Because I do think that's kind of, for that cultural piece, another element that, people need help with. To your point, John, there's a large set of people who've been displaced with COVID that probably aren't going to be able to go back to their traditional jobs. And I think there's going to be some, you can naturally see some of them try things just because they've been pushed into a situation where they have to. But how do you get to a state where people actually want to try it versus, have to have something happen to them before they're willing to try it out? Those are some of my thoughts at the moment.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Hey, Adam Sandlin, you and I have had so many conversations about this exact topic, right? Like the identity thing, all those kind of things. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts, because you've been doing a lot of thinking lately on this.
Yeah, there was something that Pranesh just said that jumped out at me around the cultural aspects that make it difficult. One of the things that we're seeing a lot is the same thing, but it goes beyond culture. It's, in the US, it's incredibly easy to start a business, to work for yourself. But in other countries, that's quite difficult. I'm working with some consultants in Europe right now, and the process to set up an LLC so that they can work for themselves is really hard. So there's absolutely some cultural components that I think we can as a community start to support, start to drive some change. But then also there's political, there's structural things that we can start to push as well, right? It has to be easy for people to work, and right now I'm not sure that it is everywhere.
Yeah, that's a great point. Steve, anything to add? Steve Rader? Are you on? Oh, I think you're on mute, I think. Let's see. I'm not sure how to unmute you.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Just as I went to hit it, my Windows went away.
Yeah.
This week has been really the importance of what we're doing in the democratization of work here is really important. Like the kinds of change that are going to be needed start with economics. And I keep going back to Leila Jaffe's Give Workbook, right? Is jobs are everything. And so making this democratization of work where opportunity really is out there for everyone, I think is going to be hugely important. And so that's been on my mind a lot this week of how do we make sure that these platforms are helping contribute to that opportunity, the democratization of opportunity, right? In kind of breaking down those traditional gatekeepers in ways that work has been kind of withheld from various communities. So that's kind of where I am right now. And I really am trying to figure out I've posted a couple of questions on what are the strategic partnerships that we need to, as a community, be fostering between education and platforms, between benefits groups, HR groups, procurement groups. How do we push on this? And I know all of this is embedded in what we've all been talking about, which is adoption rate. How do we get the demand up? Because the workers are clearly migrating out into this new world, and how do we help get the rest of the equation working so that I often talk about this as a race condition. I have that we are in a race to transition to this new way of working, and that technology increases, automation and job losses that come with all of that rapid change. We've got to keep pace with that happening. And this COVID crisis is creating a bigger job loss problem at a faster rate, but it's also sped up the adoption rate. So, how do we kind of as a collective help each other to try to move this entire marketplace to where the workers get what they need and companies start reaping the benefits that we know are there. that was a mouthful as always.
What, Steve, what good first steps do you think we need to take?
You know, I really think shoring up some of the lifelong learning aspects of the crowd. We're kind of in the buyer's market for crowd right now. I say we, the communities aren't having to compete for workers. And so there is, I don't see as hearty of a attitude of we need to make platforms the place where people develop and start to actually be their best selves, right? One of the things I don't like about Uber is it assigns the workers to a task that has no future. And what I really was inspired by Michael Burdick and Paro is with the assignment of every task, you get upskilled. And to me, partnerships with Coursera or different online courses and ways to actually move people up is going to be pivotal. And I really would love to hear from some of the platforms that have, because I know there are lots that have started implementing certification programs and training programs. But I think eventually we're going to get to where these platforms are going to be competing for labor, right? And the crowd is going to be fluid in who they can work with, and they're going to want to work with the ones that show that they're developing them. And so I think there's a good strategic investment in that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. No, thanks, Steve. Hey, John Healy, after hearing that and some of the other thoughts, any actions we should be taking to kind of to start taking action?
Yeah, so I guess that's where I've been trying to focus on the practical side of this, of getting through there. So again, many have heard me say it. I think that you have two ends of the spectrum that we're trying to support. For customers, it's speed to productivity. They're trying to get outcomes for their business and whatever they need to do and get that. For the worker, to me, it's all about a speed to a paycheck, and whether that's a higher paycheck because I've earned a new credential, I've got a new skill, or it's just simply because I've made the connection to the work that's going to be of value. Those are the friction points of greatest impact to me. So when I think about trying to get a group of organizations to come together, the sad reality is that you have to think from an antitrust perspective and make sure that you're not getting into a spot where you're going to get into trouble. So you want to avoid the things that deal with direct competitive positioning between any one of the platforms. I don't care if platform A, B, C, or D offers the best opportunity to the individual. I want to see that worker get access to work as quickly as they possibly can and earn increased value in their career as a result of having done that work. So when I think of what is not competitive and what is going to speed things up, you can start with some really simple things. People have talked about whether it's a digital wallet of some sort, that these are my credentials. This is what's there. These are the basic information that's collected through an application process. The information that is collected about a background screen or a drug test or a college degree that is the property of the individual, and making that accessible to move from one organization to another. So, and in full disclosure, I chair a blockchain task force amongst large staffing industry companies, Manpower, Adecco, Randstad, Kelly, Recruit, GI Group, Kforce, House of HR, and Proman Group are all active in this. They want to do this. There is a desire for people to do that and to recognize that that's out there. So I think you have enough critical mass in the group to say, how do we do it? But it's got to be owned and controlled by a third party. It can't be owned and controlled by any individual organization. And whether that is the OA collective coming together and defining those standards and encouraging groups to come together and accept what those standards are and allow that information to be moved and allow the workers that they engage to control the distribution of it, to me, that's a starting point. After that, I would be looking at how do we each look at the certifications we offer and agree that they are equally valid from me to you and from you to the next person, because that's where you're going to gain the next layer of value in something like this.
Yeah, I love that. I love that practical perspective. And I totally agree. I think we need to figure out what's the right mechanism of coming together and getting aligned on some standards, right? So that we speak with one voice out in the marketplace. Hey, Darren, Murph, I know you're on the call. Always have great conversations with you. Any perspective on some of the thoughts today?
Yeah, I love the conversation, John. Thanks. So for those that don't know me, I'm head of remote at GitLab. GitLab is the world's largest all remote company. We have over 1,200 people in more than 65 countries. And I've worked remotely my entire career and have been waiting for a moment like this for the world to embrace the realization that we no longer have to adhere to traditional norms in terms of coupling geography with results. So that great decoupling is going to open up massive opportunity. For a lot of people that have been placed out of work, my hope is that they actually have a ton of additional opportunity going forward that isn't dependent on geography. So I think we as a community can really lean into that, and any of the remote first practices that we've learned from networking remotely, from interviewing remotely, from teaching better communication skills and documentation skills, all of these nuanced things that it takes to work in a global environment. People are hungry for that right now. A lot of people are out of work and they're eager to look for that. So at GitLab, we've open sourced all of our knowledge on how we work remotely. If you go to allremote.info, you can find all of that. I would encourage anyone here to share all of that. I've recently worked with our learning and development team to have knowledge assessments put at the bottom of our top guides, so people can just read through those and fill that out and get some level of knowledge. More formally, we're at the early stages of working with Coursera to develop coursework and develop a certification on how to work best in a remote first world. And I'm excited about it. Remote means a lot to me. I live in a rural part of the world and work in high tech. And without remote, I fundamentally would not be able to do this. So I've seen the power of it. And just having me here, it fundamentally changes the community. And if you scale that, we can honestly work to reverse rural depopulation in a big way. So even if we don't have the exact job answers now, I think what is possible is to realize that being ready for the next job looks a lot different post-COVID, and it's going to be a lot less tied to geography, and that's going to require some new management skills and some new communication skills that I feel like all of us are empowered to do. So take those consultations, reach out to people, make the connections, and do whatever we can to decouple that reliance on geography to drive results.
Yeah, that's great. No, thanks, Darren. I really appreciate that. Diane, how about you? I mean, you're always so good at kind of putting some perspective things from so much experience. I mean, how do you think we go about this? Are you there? Oh, you're on mute, Diane. Oh, maybe she's on. I'll come back to you. Hey, Mike Morris, you and I have talked about certifications because I know you and Dave Messenger have worked on that for a bit. I mean, where are you guys on that? And how, I mean, as you think about it in the context of this conversation, what steps should we take as a group to come together and really empower everybody and get aligned and do all those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an area of activity for us for sure and I think it could be something, I think it should be something that's beyond an individual platform, just kind of create a certification in this area, in this space. And we talked about it before. I think Brian had mentioned that MBO has something. We've been working on something too, and ours is not specific to Top Coder. It's just people that are able to run and manage projects in this way, and creating a certification and a roadmap for somebody to get down, to learn that. I think that's something that is an activity we could all collectively get behind, platforms and users alike. I'd love to see OA do more in that space. I also think, just to float it out there, there's the whole, universal ID, and that's another great spot for us. Steve Radar is shaking his head. I see it going. That's a good spot, I think, for us it's a win-win for the individual, the platforms, and the users. So it's a win-win-win. I want to bring up something though that I think is like a call to action for us is the fairness issue. Listening to Pranesh and the work that I did with Microsoft, I do realize that there's something for us in this fairness thing that I think we need to tackle head on. I think part of it is just addressing the fact that we have to make sure that the experiences of the workers on the platforms is fair. And I don't think it is in every case, right? I don't think it necessarily has the best interest all the time. Across the board, you kind of look at all the platforms collectively, whether they're tech platforms, ride sharing platforms, whatever. I think that there needs to be, there's either going to be forced upon regulations and standards, or we can come up with them ourselves and make them a better experience for the people. That's one activity that I think that needs to happen. But I think at the same time, we do have to work on the perception issue of fairness, because that's what I run into a lot. It's like, well, hey, essentially you're having people do work for free. And I couldn't be further from the truth from my perspective in terms of, and I think when you really sit down and look at it, it's a person's uneducated opinion or their defensiveness to something new, but it's out there. And it's something that has to get, I think have to be tackled head on. So I think, making sure that there are kind of standards in place or guidelines in place for how to do this fairly, and also hitting it head on what the perception of that fairness kind of quote unquote is something that we could do. We could really do as a group, I believe.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's almost kind of agreeing on some kind of manifesto, right? Some rights or whatever that we can put in place and adopt as a group would be really interesting to start working towards.
And I think that gets down the path of solving some of those gigantic health and wealth issues. Like, some of us run platforms that are contained to geographies. Some of us run platforms that are, in 190 countries, and those issues are really hairy, but they have to get solved.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, John, this is Ashir. I'd love to put some thoughts into.
Man. Yeah.
So first off, let me introduce myself. I'm Ashir. I've been a stalker on this call for the last about a month and a half. But so I run Gig Now, which is a platform that EY built to help with contractor hiring. One of the things that we've been listening to our contractors is trying to figure out, what is the best e-learning platforms? What is the best sort of ways to upskill? And I think it's challenging in this environment because every single day there's someone launching new coursework out there. And so, one of the things that we've done on a sort of micro experiment basis is really sort of people that have gotten some sort of certification, some sort of, completed some sort of coursework. We're asking the people that are hiring them, do they see any value from it, from both sides of the equation? And it's been actually interesting, right? So, especially some of the technical certifications, we're getting a lot of good feedback. Like, I took an AI course and was on the job doing some AI work, and, it really sort of transformed that. And we're hearing from the hiring managers that same sort of piece. And so we're now able to use that information to sort of push back to contractors. Hey, here are some of the ones that we're seeing at the top levels that are sort of return on investment. That's really interesting. So just something that we're doing as a experiment in that space. But I think, again, as we look across the board, there are so many e-learning platforms that it's really challenging for contractors, freelancers in the space to figure out what to do to upskill themselves.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Thanks for that insight, man. That's totally true, right? There's just, in this age of abundance, needs that you gotta do more time for curation, whether it's on platforms for e-learning or how do you get those certifications. And I totally agree with you that I think data is really important. Like, what certifications are really making a difference from an employment standpoint, and what does that mean, and how do we make that work? So thanks for that ad. It was really, really great. Hey, Diane, are you on? I know you're still on mute. Jump in if you're off mute there. Ty, you've been typing some things in the chat. Anything to add? I always love your perspective on a big scale.
Well, what I just put into the chat is a company or a platform that I've been following for a while. I noticed that some folks are really interested in, the application of blockchain technology in this space. And what Colony is up to is super ambitious. They've been at it for a few years now. I read the white paper a couple of years ago and understood like less than 50% of it. Like it's pretty technical, but they're really trying to atomize work and allow people to manage, first of all, make money for publicly posted projects, but also create and manage their own currencies as well as their own kind of reputation as a worker within the Colony infrastructure. So it's a super interesting experiment. They're still in beta, but they're launched. So it's an experienceable thing. I have not actually tried it out, but I think that some of the things that they are doing there, even if Colony doesn't make it, I think some of the things that they're trying there will apply to all platforms everywhere at some point.
Great. That's good. That's a good input. Hey, Brian, just, you had so many good thoughts in the past, and, I love the way MBO is set up and really helping people, enter this kind of entrepreneurial journey. Any perspective on how we come together as a group, and, especially with your SIA experience as well?
Well, I think one of the things that is a truism is that organizations, companies, enterprises are risk averse. And we as platform players can put together the most aggressive and comprehensive standards possible. But if we don't address the underlying uncertainty that organizations have about hiring individuals, we'll never be able to satisfy demand at scale. So I think, to me, it's about addressing the inherent risks that exist in employing these nasty resources of people, because unlike other commodities like pens or paper, people have a whole host of requirements that you're required to comply with, and that's definitely expanded exponentially, like Michael said earlier, when you're dealing with international concerns. So while it's important to address the issues of fairness, and I think there was some good work done by the World Economic Forum earlier, I think late last year, on the promise of the platform is the name of that report. And we participated in that. And it kind of came up with like a manifesto, to use someone else's words, around how to engage people and how platforms should proceed in the market. But that side, in a lot of ways, takes care of itself as these things get greater and greater import. But really, establishing standards and addressing the underlying uncertainty about how companies can engage through platforms at scale is really the secret sauce. Statistically speaking, our research shows that of people who work independently, a very small percentage of them still get their work through platforms as a primary source. And referrals continue to be the #1 source of hire for both full-time hires and contingent independent workers. But I believe that the key element of certification needs to be built from the ground up, not necessarily only with educating the individuals who are going to be working on the platforms, but more importantly, establishing appropriate actionable standards that address the risk concerns of organizations. And that's the only thing that's going to address the demand side so people can be put to work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. I think that, Pranesh, the project we did with you is certainly right in that wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
Some of the great work you guys have done is that's, mitigating the risk across organizations.
Yeah, absolutely.
5 freelancer toolkit is really, really interesting for sure. Hey, Dean, how about from your perspective? I mean, I still keep coming back to that great AWS story you told a couple of weeks ago, but I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts in this area and how we come together and, for the greater good.
I don't know about the greater good. I'm a real cynical guy about the earth and the world, given it seems to be rejecting us right now, but let's put that aside. Yeah, I've taken a bunch of notes here. And I guess I'll be kind of abrupt and direct with the group here. I mean, how do we go about it? I think
I think we need to sponsor some sort of, design thinking sprint of some sort. I don't think we're going to get to an agreement on a format in a call like this. This call, and I think we should commit to, everyone throw in X dollars and hire our favorite facilitator or organization to, do a design thinking sprint is what I'm going to call it. And to me, the output of that would be something, a set of, like, say, 2 or 3 strategic thrusts that we agree we can get behind. Because right now we're conflating different things. There's an equity conversation, which is important, and there's also a commercial conversation, which is equally important, because without, that, as Pena says, it's, folks won't support things. So I think that's kind of the short of it. The thrust I'm most interested in my theory, and I think it was Steve that mentioned it, is it's a demand constrained equation. And so while the conversations around supply are interesting, i.e. around skills and things like that, I think they're only interesting in so much as we help people gain skill where we do not have enough of those experts. That's why I've chosen to focus on AWS, for example. The world is out of AWS talent, certified talent. So, like, therefore I made it my job to create more. It's just, again, selfish, because that's where I can't supply demand, right? So what do we do then? How do I increase demand? And so I immediately think of, how do I increase the leverage of a broader category of talent, and specifically in the enterprise? It's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, trying to convince organizations that a more agile, on demand, direct W-2 employee is allowed to do proper corporate level knowledge worker work. And that's still, for the most part, not true. Most people do not allow talent in the categories that we supply as platforms to do very, very important things. I know we all have our stories now. We did really cool things. I'm sure Balaji's case study is awesome. But, for the most part, the nefarious freelancer mentality still kind of sits out there. The strategic thrust I'd want to go down in support would be more around that adoption of more different kinds of labor. And it includes rethinking the way you're supposed to use your employees. And I put the whole thing together as a fluid work concept, make work more fluid. Therefore, more things get done and more categories of work can be attempted by non-traditional talent. And that's my concept. There's a lot more packed in there, but I do know in the enterprises that have leveraged freelance programs, a lot of times what happens is things that were previously either mostly not getting done, started to get done. Things went faster. So everyone has to go faster now, but that's the world we live in. So that's the concept there. So get more things done faster. We can help enterprises do that by consuming these different categories of work. And so there's my notes. Sorry, John.
Yeah, that's great, Dean. Thanks. I mean, I love this idea of some kind of we all kind of contribute to some kind of design thinking sprint to get on the same page. And I think that's something that's a really actionable item that we could take and do to start setting the groundwork to how do we work together as a community, for sure. So I really appreciate that perspective. Thanks. Hey, Mark Barton, I'm going to call on you just because I mean, your work and Eat Big Fish was always so inspiring to a lot of my work that I did, not only in innovation but also in advertising when I was at Crispin. It was definitely the Bible that we kept on our desk. I mean, any thoughts? I mean, I feel like this industry is a classic, classic challenger industry, right? We're challenging the status quo, and Eat Big Fish is about challenger brands. Like, any thoughts on how we go forward here?
Gosh. Well, I feel like an interloper in this conversation because it's not core to our business, but it's fascinating. And just to say, as much as I appreciate and applaud the idea of this group having an agenda that it's trying to fix, every call I've got off, I've been able to apply something to a client conversation. So you're having a very micro impact on me and my world just by having this kind of conversation. So, I mean, I think one of the things, maybe there's a simple answer to this question, but this idea of, you know, the world is out of Amazon programmers, that's a big insight to me. It's like, do we all have a common understanding? I was thinking about John Healy and that group that you're working on with blockchain, for example. Do we have heat maps that show where the opportunities are for people? Because, you know, I remember arguing violently with my economics professor about assumed perfect information. And even despite the internet, we aren't in a world of perfect information. So maybe one of the things that would be just really practical to build would be a heat map that shows where the opportunities are. Because, you know, I had a conversation this week with Dr. Louise Waters, who used to run a charter school system here in the Bay Area that was serving really underprivileged communities. And she was saying they're at that point for a long time as a school system. Their primary objective was to give people of color an opportunity to get into the college system. And she said, we've now recognized that that is irresponsible to saddle somebody with that debt burden with a degree that will probably be useless to all practical terms when they get out into the work world. And she was saying, we're at a loss as to how to redesign what it is that we're trying to make happen in the world now. And if she and her colleagues could see a heat map and say, there are jobs here, they're interesting, how do we create students that can map into those spaces without having to saddle them with debt and getting a, you know, some kind of degree? That would be incredibly helpful. So the challenger thinking that needs to happen here is systemic, right? It's about plugging in education and that world into the world of work and having the world of work think more clearly about, you know, looking down the road a little bit and anticipating what are the new talents and new skills that we'll need and making sure that we've got people to fit into those roles. So bit of a random spiel, but that seems to me to be some of the things I'm hearing on this call about opportunities for this group to think a little bit harder about on the supply side, but also on matching that supply to demand that you know is existing out there.
Yeah, I think that's really great and something that, you know, is more and more important, right? As the world goes faster and faster, it's the how do we upskill people, because jobs that were awesome 4 or 5 years ago aren't going to exist a couple of years from now. So
yeah, and Louise mentioned to me this notion in the academic world in education around badging, which seems to map really close. She said, you know, think of it as Boy Scout badges. You get your ropes badge, your 5-starter badge, etc. And building education systems that deliver those for people, as opposed to, you know, a BA in English or whatever it is, will be fantastically helpful in this new world that we're moving into.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. No, thanks for that, for sure. I know we only have a couple minutes left. Hey, Balaji, you and I had a great conversation yesterday. You know, you've got such a pulse on what's happening on the demand side. You know, any thoughts from the conversation today, and
yeah,
we can go forward together?
Yeah, and while many sectors have been pushed forward by this by the COVID situation, I do feel that, and again, thankfully I'm saying it at the end so people can't disagree with me too much. I think it's pushed back the open talent economy a little bit for a couple of reasons. I was reading about employee engagement scores, and they're at an all-time high over the last decade, because companies have really doubled down on focusing on employees that are left behind, the survivors of the layoffs and the furloughs. And, you know, I was also reading another BCG article about how to recover from the pandemic. And one of the things that they continue to say is cut the contractors, cut the consultants. So there's a doubling down on the concept of full-time employment and the deification of it that's happening right now. I mean, even I'm sure majority of the large firms are thinking about the same thing: cut costs, save money for full-time employers, keep more of them on staff, which has a, you know, detrimental effect on the open talent economy. I know what I don't see happening is a very nuanced conversation on, you should continue to optimize workforce while continuing to externalize workforce in places where there is a need. It feels like it's it's a very generalist conversation about how to provide more opportunities and, you know, retain more employees, versus you should do that where it makes sense, and you should also externalize where it makes sense. I think the second part of the message I'm not hearing hard enough. I reviewed like 15 or 20 CHRO surveys yesterday. There's not a single statement about how they should use flexible or open talent. So while this is an opportunity to help companies with fractional, rapid, agile talent, to what Dean was saying before, I do think that right now in the narrative at the CXO level, freelancing doesn't exist. So if we are doing that design thinking, it has to account for all of these systemic issues that exist pre-COVID, but put that layer of COVID to say, how do we get out of it while becoming stronger versus weaker?
Yeah, that's a really good wrap up. I mean, how do we even get into that mind space, right? And in an era that people are hunkering down and trying to just survive, right? So going back to those old ways of doing things, it's definitely a big challenge. Well, we're at our time, and sorry I didn't get a chance to call more people. I think in the future, I would love to just people like ping me beforehand. I want to make sure that the conversation's super diverse and everybody gets a chance to participate. So please let me know beforehand if you want to participate, or, you know, feel free to jump in and just have the conversation, or hit me up on the chat as well. But man, it was an awesome conversation today, and I think we've got a bunch of really interesting things. One of the things I hear is that, you know, it's incumbent on us as Open Assembly to start thinking about what are the pathways forward as a group, with all the participation of everybody. And it's an honor to be in that position to be a part of that conversation. So I really appreciate that. We'll take some time and think about some things and review some of the conversations from today, and maybe start laying out some ways forward so that we can all work together, agree on, and come together as a community in a more consistent way. But really, really appreciate the time and effort, and always inspired. And apologies if I was a little tired today, but promise I'll be a little bit more on my game next time. So all the best. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
Have a great week, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care. Thanks again.